The roar of the crowd was a physical entity, a tidal wave of sound that crashed against the sleek glass walls of the convention center and filtered through my cheap laptop speakers as a distorted, tinny echo. On the stage, bathed in a pulsating universe of laser lights and theatrical smoke, my former business partner, my ex-best friend, Marcus Thorne, held a controller aloft like a scepter. He was the king of this world, and tonight was his coronation. The giant screen behind him displayed the logo of Ethelgard Online, the most anticipated video game release in a decade. A game that had just gone live to millions of players. My game. He was in his element, a master showman in a ridiculously expensive black turtleneck. His handsome face, magnified 100 times on the screen, was a perfect mask of humble genius. "We did it!" he shouted, and the crowd roared back in adoration. "When I first dreamed of Ethelgard, when I first imagined this world in my mind, I wanted to create more than just a game. I wanted to create a feeling, the feeling of coming home, a world that felt real, a world with a history, a soul. This journey started in my father's workshop, watching him build things, and that spirit of creation, that legacy, is in every line of code, every pixel you see tonight." A cold, bitter laugh escaped my lips, a sound swallowed by the silence of my tiny, cluttered apartment. His father's workshop? His father was a tax attorney who hadn't touched a tool in his life. My father was the woodworker. My father was the one who taught me that every creation, whether from wood or code, must have a soul. The world he was describing, the legacy he was claiming, the feeling he was selling, it was all mine. He had stolen my life, my memories, and my grief, and repackaged them into a product with $1 billion valuation. I was the ghostwriter of a digital universe, and I was watching from the outside as he sold my soul to the world. I was locked out of my own creation, legally and completely. My name was nowhere in the credits. My contributions had been systematically erased. In the eyes of the world, and more importantly, in the eyes of the law, I was a nobody, a disgruntled ex-employee at best. He had won. The game was his. But Marcus, for all his corporate brilliance and legal maneuvering, had one fatal flaw. He was a salesman, not a creator. He knew how to sell a world, but he didn't understand how one was truly built. He had stolen the house, but he had no idea that I, the architect, had built a secret room in its foundations. A room that contained a bomb. And tonight, I was going to light the fuse. Have you ever dedicated your entire being to a project, pouring your heart, your memories, and your very identity into it, only to have it ripped away and claimed by someone else? It's a theft so profound, it feels like a part of you has been amputated. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from tonight. If you have ever had your voice silenced or your work stolen, please like this video and subscribe to this community. We understand what it means to have to fight to reclaim your own narrative. Do understand the plan I was about to set in motion, a plan that had been my only companion through months of darkness and despair. You have to understand the world I built and the man who stole it from me. 5 years ago, Ethelgard wasn't a $1 billion IP. It was a folder of sketches and a dream that lived on the single, overworked laptop in the garage of my parents' old house. My name is Hannah Clark, and I am a world builder, not just a programmer or a designer or a writer. I do all of those things. I build digital worlds from the ground up. It's the only thing I have ever wanted to do.
The seed of Ethelgard was planted in my childhood. My father was a master woodworker and antique clock restorer. Our house was filled with the gentle ticking of 100 clocks and the scent of sawdust and lemon oil. He taught me about mechanics, about the intricate dance of gears and springs. He would tell me stories about each clock, about the people who had owned them, about the history held within their wooden frames. "Everything has a story, Han," he would say, his voice a low, gentle rumble. "You just have to be patient enough to find it. A good craftsman doesn't just build an object, he imbues it with a piece of his own soul." When he died from a sudden heart attack when I was 19, my world fell silent. The ticking stopped. I dropped out of college and retreated into the only place I could still feel him, the digital worlds I was learning to build. I decided to build a game in his memory, a tribute to his craft, his philosophy, his soul. The core concept was simple, but ambitious. A world that was one giant, intricate clockwork mechanism, a forest of brass trees with whirring gears for leaves, a river of mercury flowing through crystal conduits, cities that rearranged themselves at the stroke of midnight. It was a world of breathtaking beauty, but also of loss. The central story was that of the Watchmaker, a godlike figure who had built the world and then vanished, leaving his creations to wind down and decay. The player's quest was to rediscover his secrets, to repair the world, to bring the ticking back to life. It was my story. It was my grief. It was called The Alchemist's Garden. I worked on it alone for a year, pouring every ounce of myself into it. I had the vision, the design, the story. What I didn't have was business sense. That's where Marcus came in. Marcus and I had been friends in college. He was everything I wasn't. Charismatic, outgoing, and effortlessly charming. He was a business major who could sell ice in a blizzard. He saw my prototype and his eyes lit up, not with the wonder of a player, but with the sharp, acquisitive glint of an investor. "Hannah, this is incredible," he'd said, his voice buzzing with an energy that was both infectious and slightly unnerving. "This isn't just a game. This is an IP. This is a universe. But you can't do it alone. You need a partner. You need me." We founded a company, a tiny 2-person startup called Clockwork Muse. I was the chief creative officer. He was the CEO. We were a perfect team. I built the world and he sold the dream. He was brilliant at it. He secured our first round of seed funding with nothing more than my concept art and his own silver-tongued pitch. For the first 2 years, it was a true partnership. We worked out of that garage, living on instant noodles and pure, unadulterated passion. We were going to change the world. The first crack in the foundation appeared when we got our first major publishing deal. The publisher, a massive, soulless corporation called Monolith Interactive, loved the game, but they hated the name. The Alchemist's Garden is too poetic, too niche, the marketing executive had said in a sterile boardroom that felt a million miles from my dad's workshop. "We need something with more punch, something epic, something that sounds like a franchise. Let's call it Aethelgard Online." I hated it. It sounded generic, like 100 other fantasy games. But Marcus, ever the pragmatist, sided with the publisher. "It's a better name for the market, Han. We have to be smart about this," he had said, his voice soothing, reasonable. "It's a small compromise. The soul of the game is still yours." I reluctantly agreed. It was the first of 1,000 small compromises, 1,000 tiny cuts that would slowly bleed the soul out of my creation. With Monolith's money, we grew. We hired a team. We moved into a slick, impersonal office downtown. Marcus began to change. He traded his worn-out jeans for tailored suits. He spent less time in the design meetings and more time in boardrooms, talking about monetization strategies and Q4 earnings projections. He started referring to the game's players not as community, but as users. He started referring to my deeply personal story as the narrative asset. He brought in consultants, marketing gurus, who insisted on changes. The Clockwork Forest was deemed too industrial and was given a generic fantasy makeover. The quiet, melancholic story of the Watchmaker's grief was too depressing and was rewritten to include a loud, bombastic war between 2 competing factions. Every change was a dagger in my heart. I fought them, tooth and nail, in meeting after meeting. "You're gutting it, Marcus," I'd plead with him in the hallway after another brutal creative review. "This isn't the game we started. This isn't my father's story anymore." "It stopped being just your father's story the day we took their money, Hannah," he would argue, his patience wearing thin. "This is a product now. It has to appeal to the widest possible demographic. You're too close to it. You're being emotional. Let the experts do their job." He began to use my passion against me, framing it as a weakness. I was the sensitive artist. He was the clear-eyed businessman. The team, wanting to keep their jobs, started deferring to him. I was becoming a stranger in my own house. The final, fatal blow came 3 months before the launch date. It was a move of such cold, calculated corporate brutality that I never saw it coming. He called me into his office. Our lawyer was there. "We're exercising the key person clause in the original partnership agreement," Marcus said, his voice devoid of any emotion. "The board has determined that your creative disagreements are no longer productive for the company's forward momentum. We are terminating your employment, effective immediately." I've just stared at him, my mind unable to process the words. The key person clause. I vaguely remembered signing that first partnership agreement 5 years ago in the garage, a thick stack of papers I hadn't really understood. Our first lawyer, a friend of Marcus's, had told me it was standard boilerplate. I had trusted him. I had trusted Marcus. The clause stated that if one of the founding partners was deemed to be acting against the company's best interests, the other partner, with a majority vote from the board, a board Marcus had been carefully stacking with his own allies for a year, could buy out their shares at their initial valuation. Not their current, pre-launch billion-dollar valuation, their garage startup 5 years ago valuation. It was a legal loophole designed for exactly this kind of corporate assassination. "You're firing me?" I whispered, my voice a thread. "From my own company? From my own game?" "It's not your company anymore, Hannah," he said, his voice as cold as the glass and steel of the building around us. "Security will escort you out. Your personal effects will be mailed to you." I was thrown out of the building I had helped build. I was locked out of the servers that held my life's work. I was legally gagged by a non-disclosure agreement that prevented me from saying a single word in public about my involvement in the creation of Athelgard. I was, in a single, brutal afternoon, completely and utterly erased. The months that followed were a descent into a gray, featureless hell. I was a ghost, haunting the edges of my own life. I watched as the marketing machine for Athelgard ramped up. My work, my ideas, my very soul, plastered on billboards and in slick cinematic trailers. And at the center of it all was Marcus. His face on the cover of magazines, hailed as the new visionary of the gaming world. He gave interviews where he talked about his creative process, where he recounted the story of his father's workshop. He was not just a thief, he was a plagiarist of a life. I tried to fight it. I hired a lawyer, a good, passionate woman who was horrified by my story. But she was blunt. "Legally, Hannah, your hands are tied. You signed the contract. It's an immoral, predatory contract, but it's legally binding. If we sue, we will lose, and Monolith's legal team will bury you in countersuits that will bankrupt you for the rest of your life. And with the NDA, you can't even go to the press. They would sue you for damages in the tens of millions. I'm sorry. They've built a perfect legal prison around you." The despair was a physical weight. I stopped eating. I stopped sleeping. I was drowning. My creation was about to be born into the world, and I was going to be forced to watch its christening from a gutter, forbidden from even speaking its name. But in the darkest hour, as I was packing up the last remnants of my old life from the garage, which my mother now had to sell, I found it. A small, leather-bound notebook. It was one of my father's old clock-making journals. His familiar, elegant handwriting filled the pages with sketches of gears and escapements. Tucked into the back pocket was a small, folded piece of paper. On it, he had written a quote. "The craftsman is not afraid of the machine. He is the ghost within it." And in that moment, a spark ignited in the darkness, a cold, furious, and brilliant spark. Marcus thought he had locked me out. He had taken the machine. But he had forgotten about the ghost. In the final week before I was fired, I knew something was wrong. The atmosphere in the office had turned cold, hostile. I was being shut out of meetings. My access to certain files was suddenly restricted. I knew.
with a sick, primal intuition that I was being pushed out. And in a final, desperate act of defiance, an act I wasn't even sure why I was committing, I had spent a sleepless night in my office just before they took away my access, and I had built a secret room. I was the lead architect of Aethelgard's codebase. I knew its secret passages, its hidden corridors better than anyone, and I had embedded a piece of myself deep in its source code, a digital time bomb, a Trojan horse of my own creation. It was a small, dormant block of code disguised as a redundant physics engine subroutine. It was invisible to any standard diagnostic, but it wasn't just code. It was a key that when activated by a very specific, impossibly obscure sequence of in-game actions would unlock a hidden, unindexed part of the game's server. A part of the server that the main game couldn't see, a part that Marcus and the Monolith programmers didn't even know existed. On that secret server, I had uploaded a single encrypted file, my own legacy. I called it the Watchmaker's Journal. This was my plan. I couldn't sue him. I couldn't go to the press. But I could hijack his creation at its moment of greatest triumph. I would not destroy the game. I would reveal its truth. I would use his own billion-dollar stage to tell my story. The launch event was my deadline. I spent the next 3 months not in despair, but in a feverish, focused creation. I couldn't fight him in a courtroom, so I would prepare for a different kind of trial, one held in the court of public opinion, with millions of gamers as the jury.
First, I needed a delivery system. The key to unlocking my hidden code was a sequence of 17 actions in the game. Things like crafting a specific, useless item, standing on a particular mountain peak at midnight, and saying a line of my father's favorite poem in the chat. A sequence so random and so personal that no player would ever stumble upon it by accident. I needed to get that sequence to the right person at the right time. I began to research the world of professional esports and live streaming. I wasn't looking for the biggest streamer, I was looking for the right one. A maverick, an underdog, someone with a reputation for being curious, for breaking games, for looking in places no one else looked. I found her in a streamer who went by the name of Echo. She was a brilliant player, but she was famous for her lore hunt, for her deep dives into the stories and secrets of the games she played. She had a small but incredibly dedicated following. She was my perfect messenger. Second, I needed to prepare the evidence. The Watchmaker's Journal file wasn't just a confession. That would be my word against his. It was a digital museum, a treasure trove of irrefutable time-stamped proof. I had spent years backing up my work on private hard drives. I compiled it all. My original concept art from 5 years ago, my initial design documents for the Alchemist's Garden, audio files of my brainstorming sessions, even a short, poignant video of my father in his workshop talking about his craft, the very video that had inspired the game's central theme. Everything was watermarked with my name and the original creation dates. It was a digital ghost, an incorporeal but undeniable record of my soul's journey. The stage was set. The trap was laid. And as I sat in my apartment watching Marcus soak in the adoration of the crowd, my hand hovered over my keyboard. The game was now live. The world of Ethelgard was open. It was time for the ghost to enter the machine. The first week after Ethelgard's launch was a strange, surreal purgatory. The game was a colossal success, breaking every sales record in history. The critics lauded it, praising its unprecedented depth and hauntingly beautiful world. Every word of praise was a fresh twist of the knife. I watched from the sidelines as the world fell in love with my stolen creation. Marcus was everywhere, the new Steve Jobs of the gaming world.
He was on talk shows, in magazines, his carefully crafted narrative of the solitary genius repeated until it became fact. He was brilliant, I had to admit. He never mentioned me, not even as a disgruntled ex-employee. In his version of history, I had simply never existed. I waited. The first part of my plan was the most difficult. It required an almost inhuman patience. I had to let the world of Ethelgard breathe. I had to let the players explore, build communities, and fall in love with the world. My attack could not seem like the act of a saboteur trying to destroy the game. It had to be perceived as a revelation, the discovery of a hidden truth. During this time, I watched Echo's stream relentlessly. I learned her rhythms, her habits, her catchphrases. I needed to understand her, to know how she would react when the time came. She was, as I had hoped, fascinated by the world of Ethelgard, but also slightly frustrated by it. "There's something missing, you guys," she said to her chat one night, her character standing on a cliff overlooking one of my original clockwork landscapes. "It's beautiful, but it feels hollow, like a beautiful body with no soul. The main story is so generic. I feel like there's a deeper, better story hidden here somewhere that got cut." My heart leapt. She felt it. She felt my absence. She was the one.
After 2 weeks, the time was right. The initial launch hype had settled, and the hardcore players like Echo were beginning to dig into the game's deeper mysteries. It was time to plant the first seed. I created an anonymous, untraceable email account and a burner social media profile under the name The Watchmaker's Ghost. I began my campaign not with a bang, but with a whisper. I sent a single cryptic email to a small, obscure gaming forum dedicated to Ethelgard lore. The email contained only a single image, a piece of my original concept art for the Alchemist's Garden, a brass forest under a sky of swirling nebulae, a piece that looked nothing like the final, sanitized version of the game. The file name was whatwaslost.jpg. It caused a small stir. A few dedicated lorehounds debated its origin. Was it cut content? A hoax? It was a mystery. A few days later, I leaked another piece, this time a short, anonymous audio file. It was my voice from an old design meeting passionately describing the original story of the grieving watchmaker. Again, no context, just a fragment of a ghost. The whispers grew louder. The watchmaker's ghost became a minor legend in the game's community. People started searching for clues, for any hint of this lost version of the game. I was creating a hunger for the truth. Now, it was time to contact Echo. I couldn't just send her the sequence. It had to feel like a discovery, a reward for her own curiosity. I started leaving her clues. I used my anonymous account to post a comment in her live stream chat, a single cryptic line of poetry, the same line my father had written in his journal, a line I had programmed into the activation sequence. She saw it. "Huh, that's weird. The hands of the clock can be turned, but time's river flows only one way. What the heck does that mean?" Her chat went wild with speculation. The next day, I left another clue, this time on a forum she was known to frequent, a riddle that pointed to a specific, remote location in the game world. I was leading her on a breadcrumb trail, a quest of my own design, built in the real world but pointing into the digital one. She took the bait. Her next stream was dedicated to solving the mystery of the watchmaker's ghost. It was the most watched stream of her career. Tens of thousands of people were watching as she followed my clues, her excitement building. The final clue was a complex cipher that, when solved, would reveal the full 17-step sequence. It took her and her entire community 6 hours to crack it. The sun was rising outside my apartment window when she finally read the final, decoded message aloud, her voice filled with a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. It's a sequence of actions, a cheat code?
No, it's too weird for that. Craft the morning bell, climb the sundered peak at the moment of the twin moon's eclipse, speak the words of the lament? What is this? Is this how we find the ghost? She had the key. The stage was set. The grand finale of her quest and the beginning of my retribution was scheduled for the following night, the night of the first ever Aethelgard World Championship Finals, an event being broadcast live on every major gaming platform with an expected audience of over 5 million people. An event where the grand prize would be presented by the game's visionary creator, Marcus Thorne. He was about to host a party in his honor. He had no idea he had just been handed an invitation to his own execution. The night of the championship was a symphony of manufactured hype. The arena was packed. The online viewership numbers were staggering. Marcus was in his element, sitting in the commentator booth alongside the professional hosts, providing his creator's insight into the match. He looked smug, relaxed, untouchable.
Echo was not a participant in the tournament. She was hosting her own alternative stream, providing commentary and analysis for her own massive audience, who were more interested in her quest for the truth than the sterile professional match. Her viewer count was climbing, rivaling the official broadcast. The mystery of the watchmaker's ghost had become a global phenomenon. She waited until the final match of the tournament reached its crescendo. The two professional teams were locked in a stalemate. The official commentators were screaming with excitement. Then, on her own stream, Echo looked directly into her camera. "Okay, guys, the pros are having their fun, but we're here for the real story. It's time to see what's behind the curtain. It's time to meet the ghost." Her character, a nimble clockwork automaton, disengaged from the battle. While the professional players fought for a trophy, she began the sequence. The world was watching. I sat in my apartment, my heart a frantic pounding drum against my ribs. My hands were so slick with sweat I could barely hold my mouse. This was it. Years of work, months of planning, all came down to this moment. I watched her screen, my own screen, a dozen other streams, my finger hovering over the final command. One by one, she performed the 17 rituals. She crafted the useless, melancholic item. She journeyed to the remote, forgotten mountaintop. And as the game's twin moons aligned in a rare eclipse, she typed the final words of the sequence into the chat, the line from my father's poem. For a moment, nothing happened. A collective gasp of disappointment went through her chat. Had it all been a hoax? Then the world shook. On her screen, the very fabric of the game began to glitch and distort. The sky turned a dark, bruised purple. The ground beneath her character's feet dissolved into a scurrade of swirling numbers and symbols. The other players in the game, the professionals in the final match, all stopped fighting, their characters frozen as they stared at the impossible event unfolding in the sky. On the main broadcast, the commentators fell silent, utterly bewildered. "What is happening? Is this a hack? A server crash?" one of them stammered. I looked at the small window showing Marcus's face. His smug smile was gone, replaced by a mask of pure, horrified confusion. He knew. He didn't know how, but he knew this was me. On Echo's stream, her character fell through the broken world and landed in a new space, a place that was not on any map, a place that did not officially exist. It was a silent, gray, unfinished landscape, the developer's workshop, a ghost level. In the center of the gray void was a single, ornate, wooden workbench, identical to the one that had stood in my father's workshop. On the bench was a single, leather-bound book, the Watchmaker's Journal. "No way," Echo whispered, her voice filled with awe. She guided her character to the book, and as she did, I executed the final part of my plan. The encrypted file on my hidden server was tied to this in-game object. The moment she opened that book,
It triggered a command, my command. A new window opened, not just on Echo Screen, but on the screen of every single person playing or watching Ethelgard online worldwide. It was not a game window. It was a video player. And it began to play the contents of the Watchmaker's Journal. It started with my original concept art for the Alchemist's Garden, each piece clearly watermarked, Hannah Clark, 2018. Then, my original design documents, the pages scrolling by, detailing a story of grief and renewal, not of war and factions. Then the audio files played, my own voice, young and passionate, explaining my vision. And finally, the last piece of evidence, the video of my father.
There he was, in his workshop years ago, smiling, sawdust in his hair. He was holding a small, intricate clockwork bird. The secret, you see, isn't just making the gears turn, he was saying, his voice warm and kind. It's about making something that feels alive. You have to give it a little piece of your own soul. You have to leave a little ghost in the machine. The video faded to black, and a final line of text appeared on the screen in a simple, elegant font. Ethelgard was created by Hannah Clark. This is her story. This is her soul. The hijacking was complete. For a full 3 minutes, I had taken control of the world's biggest video game and replaced it with the truth. I had turned my prison into my platform. The chaos that erupted was instantaneous and absolute. The official broadcast was cut to a test pattern. The game's servers crashed. On the small video feed from the commentator's booth, I saw Marcus rip off his headset and storm off the set, his face a mask of pure apoplectic rage. He was no longer a king. He was just a man in a turtleneck exposed as a fraud in front of the entire world. The ghost had spoken, and the machine was broken. The fallout was a corporate apocalypse. Watchmaker's Ghost became the single biggest story in the entertainment world. The video I had broadcast was ripped, copied, and re-uploaded everywhere, dissected and analyzed by millions. The juxtaposition of my raw, creative passion with the polished, soulless product they had been sold was a story of David and Goliath for the digital age. The community I had so carefully cultivated rose up in my defense. The hashtag #GiveBackEthelgard trended worldwide for 48 hours. Monolith Interactive went into full damage control. Their stock price plummeted. Their carefully crafted PR narrative was in shreds. Marcus Thorne was fired in a terse one-sentence press release. His career in the industry was over. His name now a permanent synonym for fraud and theft. The legal battle that followed was not one I had to fight alone. Armed with the irrefutable, time-stamped proof of my creation and the overwhelming support of the public, my lawyer went on the offensive. Monolith, facing a PR nightmare of epic proportions and a class action lawsuit from players who felt they had been sold a fraudulent product, had no choice but to come to the table. It was not a quick or easy negotiation, but in the end, I won. Not just a settlement, not just a payout. I won back the one thing that had ever mattered. They transferred the full intellectual property rights for Ethelgard back to me. It was mine again. The company I had been thrown out of was gutted. With Marcus gone and its only asset now belonging to me, it dissolved. I used the significant financial settlement from Monolith to found a new, independent studio. I called it The Watchmaker's Ghost. I hired back the best of my original team, the ones who had been forced out or had quit in disgust. Our first project was to reclaim our creation. We spent a year not creating a sequel, but rebuilding the original. We stripped away the corporate focus-tested garbage. We restored the clockwork forest. We put the grief and the soul back into the story. We renamed it The Alchemist's Garden. When we re-released it under its true name and in its true form, it was more than just a game. It was a statement. It was a triumph. It became one of the most beloved and respected games of all time. Not for its sales figures, but for its heart.
my life is no longer quiet or lived in the shadows. Building and running my own studio is the hardest thing I have ever done. It is a world of stress and deadlines and impossible challenges, and it is a world of my own making. I am no longer a ghost. I am the watchmaker. The reconciliation with Marcus never happened. He disappeared from public life, a pariah in the industry he so desperately wanted to conquer. I heard he was working in venture capital, a world where a soulless nature is often considered an asset. I do not hate him anymore. I barely think of him at all. He's just a footnote in the story of my life, the villain I had to defeat to become the hero of my own narrative. Have you ever had to fight to reclaim your own story from someone who was trying to rewrite it? Share your experience in the comments below. Your stories of taking back the narrative are a powerful reminder that our voices are our own. Please don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories about the art of the perfect comeback. Remember, they can steal your work. They can steal your title. They can even steal your name. But they can never steal the ghost in your machine.